Steroids have been part of professional wrestling for more than 50 years. Back in the old days, almost every wrestler was using muscle drugs. It was like a secret rule. Everyone knew about it, but nobody talked about it openly. Even though these drugs are banned today, you can still see the damage on many wrestlers' bodies and faces. In this video, we will look at wrestlers who used steroids and how their appearance changed over the years. Let's jump right in. Number 10. The Ultimate Warrior. The crowd would go absolutely insane. He was one of the most popular wrestlers ever. Before wrestling, his real name was James Hellwig. He was a bodybuilder. He won contests like Junior Atlanta in 1981 and Mr. Georgia. His early body was built from hard work in the gym, but at some point, just lifting weights was not enough for him. The truth is, Ultimate Warrior did not just use steroids a little bit. He used them heavily. He also used other drugs and alcohol. His personal life was a complete mess. WWE even fired him because of his drug problems. If you look at his high school photos, he already looked strong and muscular as a teenager, so nobody knows exactly when he started using steroids, but by the time he was on WWE TV in the 1980s with that crazy huge body, everyone knew something was not natural. Fans from the 80s still remember seeing him for the first time. His arms looked like they were going to explode. His shoulders were so wide they did not look real. His chest was so pumped up it looked like it might rip his clothes and say weird things that made no sense. His eyes looked unfocused. He moved strange. Many people believed he was not just on steroids but on other drugs too, just to hide how badly his body was breaking down. Other famous wrestlers talked about it too. Bret Hart said nobody was surprised that Warrior had been on steroids for a very long time. He was not sure Warrior ever stopped. Ted DiBiase was even more direct. He said Warrior's biggest feature was his massive body, and he wonders if drugs played a role in Warrior's death. The Ultimate Warrior died in 2014 from a heart attack. He was only 54 years old. This happened just 3 days after he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. On April 8, 2014, he was walking to his car with his wife outside a hotel in Arizona. He put his hand over his heart and fell to the ground. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, he was already dead. The doctors found that his heart was damaged. He had serious heart disease. His heart weighed 650 grams. That is more than twice the normal weight of a man's heart. Normal heart weight is only 283 grams. His arteries were also blocked by 50 to 60%. That means blood could not flow properly. This is what caused the heart attack. The death was ruled natural. That means he was not on drugs at the exact moment he died. But nobody can deny that years and years of steroid use destroyed his heart slowly. Warrior himself joked in an interview that if he was still using steroids at his age, he would need a dump truck to carry his liver around. It sounds funny, but it is also a sad admission of how much poison he put into his body. During the 1994 steroid trial, Warrior admitted he used steroids. He also told the court that 80 to 90% of WWE wrestlers had used steroids at some point. That is almost everyone. If you compare the Ultimate Warrior at his peak, with muscles swollen to the max, veins everywhere, looking like a god, to his final years, the difference is shocking. In his last years, he looked tired, worn out, and much thinner. His body was destroyed. That is the real price of steroids. Number 9. Hulk Hogan. Of course, we have to talk about Hulk Hogan. It would be weird not to include him in this video. Just looking at his history of scandals and controversies makes it obvious why his name is tied to steroids. If you look at his body in his prime, it looked like his skin was about to explode. That is not a natural body. Hulk Hogan started wrestling in 1977. Back then, wrestling was like the Wild West. There were no rules. Companies did not ban steroids. They did not test wrestlers for drugs. As long as you were on TV and the fans liked you, nobody cared what you put in your body. In that environment, Hogan was just one of many guys using steroids to build a superhero body. He spent 10 years climbing to the top. By the 1980s, Hogan was not just a wrestler. He was a pop culture icon. Blonde hair, mustache, and a huge cartoon body. You cannot deny Hogan was great at controlling the crowd. He knew when to stay down, when to hulk up, and how to blow the roof off the arena. His charisma was perfect for wrestling, but one of the biggest reasons people loved him was his body. Muscles looked sculpted. Biceps were round. Veins popped everywhere. It looked too perfect to be real. At first, it was just rumors. But then came the 1994 steroid trial. In 1993, WWE CEO Vince McMahon was accused of supplying steroids to wrestlers. He denied it, but he had to go to court. In court, the truth came out. WWE had a doctor who gave steroids to many big names. Hulk Hogan was one of them. Before the trial, Hogan always denied using steroids, but in court, he had no choice. He admitted it. He said steroid use was very common among WWE wrestlers in the 1980s. He admitted he used them for about 14 years. He even said he used steroids before he became a full-time pro wrestler. Hogan described how Vince McMahon's secretary would give him the drugs. He said he only used steroids to recover from injuries, not to cheat. But let's be honest, faster recovery and extra strength is still a huge advantage. After the trial in 1994, WWE and the whole industry had to change. They made stricter drug testing rules. That made it impossible for Hogan and others to use steroids as freely as before. The results showed on his body. After 1994, Hogan was still muscular and solid, but he was no longer that cartoon superhero with the crazy huge muscles. The freaky fullness disappeared. His muscles looked more realistic. He still looked strong, but less superhuman. Some fans say it was just age, but if you really look at Hogan's body right after the trial, the difference is obvious. The unnatural blown-up look faded fast. Even after his body changed, Hogan kept winning championships. He became a 6-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion. He won the WWE Championship 6 more times. In other words, steroids helped make the most terrifying version of Hulk Hogan. But they did not create his talent, charisma, or ability to connect with fans. Those things cannot be injected. What people argue about most is Hogan's attitude. To him, steroids never seemed like a big sin. Just a few months after the trial, he bragged that he survived the scandal and would be around wrestling for a long time. In later interviews, Hogan said steroids were once seen as normal in sports. He claimed people believed steroids were safer than sugar. He said he never understood why they were banned in wrestling. It is a brutally honest opinion, but it also means Hulk Hogan's name will forever be tied to the word steroids. Number 8, Vince McMahon. If we are talking about steroids in wrestling, we have to mention Vince McMahon. He has been wrapped up in all kinds of scandals for decades, but when it comes to steroids, there is no room to hide. First, just look at his body at different times. It is hard to believe it is totally natural. Second, his change from a normal-looking boss to a shredded muscle body happened very fast. Third, if you remember the 1994 steroid trial, things get even clearer. That trial did not start with some random wrestler. It started with Vince McMahon himself being prosecuted by the U.S. government. He was linked to a shady doctor who supplied drugs. From the charges against him, the investigation spread to WWE and its wrestlers. In other words, if you follow the steroid story in WWE, it leads right back to the chairman. When you think about it, it is ironic. The man at the top, the boss who controlled everyone's careers, was also one of the most enthusiastic steroid users. Vince McMahon openly admitted he used steroids in the early 1990s. He argued that back then they were not illegal. After the trial, he seemed forced to stop. But the arguments about whether he really quit have never gone away. And honestly, that makes sense. When you see a guy in his 70s with a body that still looks like a gym-obsessed tank, people are going to ask questions. Vince describes his training like a serious bodybuilder. He trains each muscle group once a week with heavy weights and no mercy. He has also had spinal surgery. He blames it partly on overdoing it in the gym, especially being addicted to squatting way too much weight. So even if we believe he truly has not touched steroids in years, what we see on his body now is still the long-term damage from years of pushing himself to the limit and injecting performance drugs. That is why Vince McMahon belongs on this list, not just as the boss, but as a walking example of a side of wrestling very few people talk about openly. Number 7, Scott Steiner. If you last saw Scott Steiner in the early 1990s in WWF, you probably remember him as a big, solid guy with a well-balanced, classic wrestling body. Then a few years later, he shows up in WCW as Big Papa Pump. Fans had to check twice if they were looking at the same person. This was not the old Scott Steiner. This looked like someone cranked all his stats to maximum. Enormous arms like pillars, a chest so overblown it looked warped, shoulders so wide they barely looked human. Behind the sunglasses, mustache, and slicked-back blonde hair, he called himself the Big Bad Booty Daddy. He did not just want to beat opponents. He wanted to destroy every standard for what a wrestling body could look like. Every time he walked out, he looked more like a living statue than a human. Muscles exploding everywhere, veins crawling across his skin. Fans were impressed and a little scared at the same time. Instead of a balanced body, his look crossed straight into too much, like he might rip his shirt just by breathing. Of course, with a body that extreme, suspicions about steroids were impossible to avoid. Scott Steiner has never publicly admitted anything. There is no official record of him failing a drug test, but the way he reacted only only made people talk more. When WWE asked him to take a drug test, his response was short and sharp. He said, "I will get tested if Triple H does too." Just one line, but it started endless debates about double standards, about who really has to follow the rules and who gets a softer touch in the wrestling business. In the end, whether you believe he was using steroids or not is up to you. Some people say it was just brutal training and freak genetics. Others say there is no way you reach that level of muscle monster without chemical help. But no matter which side you are on, everyone agrees on one thing. Scott Steiner's freakish body became an unforgettable symbol. It made people gasp in shock. But it also raised a tough question. Should anyone push their body that far just to look shocking under the lights? Number 6. Buff Bagwell. Buff Bagwell was Scott Steiner's loyal partner during WCW's glory days. He was not just a sidekick, he was a full-on muscle icon. From the moment he took the name Buff, everything about him was defined by one thing: his body, his value, his image, his appeal. All of it revolved around being jacked. His body was not just an asset, it was also a chain around his neck. If he looked even a little normal, he risked being swallowed up by other wrestlers trying to outmuscle him on TV. Unlike many wrestlers who cycled steroids, going on for a while and then stopping to let their bodies recover, Buff chose a far more extreme path. He stayed on steroids almost year-round, 365 days, no real off-season. No break. For him, every day was a mirror check. Was he still buff enough? Still living up to the Buff Daddy image fans expected? The more he clung to that name, the closer his body was pushed to its limit. What is interesting is that Buff Bagwell does not hide his past. On his YouTube channel, he has spoken openly about what he put into his body. From his days as a high school kid lifting weights all the way to his run as a TV star in WCW. These stories do not sound like bragging. They are not excuses either. They sound more like confessions mixed with bitterness from someone looking back and realizing that the same thing that gave him fame was also quietly eating away at his health. At his peak, Buff was everywhere, muscles popping, a cocky grin, and the swagger of a man who truly believed he was the perfect poster boy. But under that tight, shiny skin, his heart, liver, blood vessels, and nerves were all straining under the weight of drugs, brutal training, and constant bumps in the ring. That price does not show up overnight. It builds slowly, quietly, until it finally explodes. Today, when people look at Buff Bagwell, they no longer see an untouchable Buff Daddy with an invincible body. Instead, they see someone who has been through extreme pain, both physical and mental. In fact, he has now lost a leg. That image, as painful as it is, sends a stronger message than any speech. The spotlight eventually fades. The crowd eventually goes quiet. What sticks with you is not the punches you threw or the crazy bumps you took. It is the damage left behind by steroids and an extreme lifestyle. Buff Bagwell was once a symbol of impossible muscles. Now he stands as a living reminder of the heavy price you pay when you try to cling forever to a body that does not belong to your age or to the natural limits of your body. Number 5. Triple H. The guy in the ring was no longer the rugged Hunter Hearst Helmsley of the 1990s. He was a full-on muscle warrior. Massive shoulders, thick arms, every muscle fiber popping like it had been made from steel. The transformation happened so fast that many people wondered, was hard work in the gym really enough to get there? Triple H has never publicly admitted to using steroids. There is no official test result directly exposing him. But for people who followed him closely, the timeline tells its own story. If you compare Triple H's look in 2002 to how he looked just a few years later, around 2004 to 2005, when he and Stephanie McMahon were trying to have kids, the difference is obvious. He went from sharp and rock-solid to a thicker, more bloated look with less definition and a heavier frame. For someone known for loving the gym and sticking to strict training routines, that kind of sudden drop in condition is hard to explain. Many people started speculating that his freak shape of 2002 might have been tied to hormone-boosting methods, and that he later had to stop, maybe for health reasons, or fertility reasons, or to better fit the image of an executive and company leader instead of just a full-time wrestler. Even so, Triple H has never been caught. There is no information showing he ever failed a wellness test. That keeps his story stuck in a gray area. There is not enough proof to convict him, but there is also too much to completely ignore. Ironically, Triple H has been very vocal in criticizing people who use banned substances. That makes the topic even more sensitive. With a body that once looked beyond the limit, followed by such clear changes a few years later, every time he talks about steroids, some fans cannot help but think, is the game truly 100% clean? Or just the best player in a game where everyone knows the rules, but almost no one says them out loud? Number 4. Lex Luger. Lex Luger was the perfect example of a 1990s wrestler. Chiseled body, massive shoulders and arms, veins popping under the lights, every muscle fiber visible. Before wrestling, he played football and had an elite athletic base, but Luger himself admitted he started using steroids back when he was still playing football, long before becoming a pro wrestler. When he joined WWE in 1992, fans were easily drawn to the image of a tall, muscular man with a near-perfect body. At his peak, Luger had a whole arsenal of power moves. Fans called him the total package, the complete mix of body, strength, and presentation. WWE's creative team even thought about making him the next world champion. They had a long-term plan to make him the new face of the company. And then everything fell apart because of one mistake. During a drunken night at a bar, Luger accidentally told people the entire storyline WWE had planned for him. In wrestling, secrecy is crucial. That kind of mistake is basically ripping up your own contract. The big push was scrapped. Management's trust crumbled. Not long after, Luger was quietly shown the door in 1995. He spent the rest of his career in other promotions, places that were still happy to pay for that unforgettable look, even if his brightest spotlight had already faded. Those years were also when his personal life spiraled into darkness. He kept running into legal trouble, driving under the influence, being investigated in connection with his girlfriend's death, getting caught with illegal substances. Toward the end of his career, fans noticed how much smaller he looked, his frame shrinking, his muscles deflating, almost unrecognizable compared to the powerhouse he once was. At the time, many people blamed the weight loss on drugs. They assumed his body was being eaten away by addiction. But the truth was more complicated. Luger later revealed he had deliberately stopped using steroids and shifted to anti-aging supplements in the final years of his career. The deflated look was the price of dropping the performance drugs he had relied on for so long. Then, in 2007, he took another devastating hit. A severe spinal nerve injury left him paralyzed. He had to battle paralysis and rebuild his life from the ground up. The time he spent in hospital beds, dependent on others for even the smallest tasks, completely changed how Luger saw himself. From someone who once lived entirely for his appearance, he became a devout Christian. He began openly talking about the dark secrets he had kept hidden. Luger called himself one of the biggest cheaters. He bluntly admitted he had been a heavy steroid user. He described how he cycled them over roughly 6-week periods to the point where his body essentially shut down its natural hormone production. Those drugs took over the job of producing testosterone, allowing him to maintain the shredded, sculpted look fans saw during his peak years. He did not stop there. Lex went into detail about the tricks he used to beat drug tests, bringing fake urine, using Vaseline to mess with samples, even intimidating lab technicians so they would help with the paperwork. Speaking more broadly about wrestling, he painted a picture of a world where everyone talks about wanting a level playing field, but in reality, they live by the mindset of, if they are all using, I do not want to be left behind. That mentality, combined with the pressure to look superhuman under the camera, dragged an entire generation into the spiral of steroids and other drugs. Today, if you compare Lex Luger now to the total package of the 1990s, you might need a second look to believe it is the same person. The massive frame is gone, replaced by a thinner body marked by age and illness. But that transformation carries a different meaning. Instead of being a poster boy for a steroid-fueled body, Luger is trying to serve as a living warning about the real cost of drugs and performance enhancers. He appears at talks, speaks openly about his mistakes, and uses the shattered and rebuilt pieces of his life as a reminder. There is no such thing as a perfect package that comes free, especially when it is built on lies and illegal substances. Number 3, Kurt Angle. Next, we have Kurt Angle. You have probably heard the story about the man who broke his neck 5 times and still kept wrestling. He endured a level of pain that makes normal people sick just hearing about it. And yes, the missing piece that completes that picture is steroids and medication. Kurt Angle won an Olympic gold medal before he became a WWE star. We all know how strict the Olympic Committee is about doping. Because of that, Kurt Angle became the perfect example for comparing two versions of the same person: a fully natural athlete versus a body helped by drugs. As an amateur preparing for the Olympics, he was extremely lean, dry, and compact. The perfect image of a national-level competitor. But if you put that image next to Kurt Angle at his WWE peak, the difference is almost shocking. From a tight, compact frame to a full-blown muscle machine who looked like he could tear an opponent in half with his bare hands. All those suspicions were confirmed in 2006 during an investigation involving the Palm Beach Rejuvenation Center. This place was accused of supplying performance-enhancing drugs. Kurt Angle was found to have tested positive for nandrolone. That is when the truth really started to come out. It seems that after so many injuries, especially with his neck being destroyed repeatedly, he began relying on steroids, alcohol, and painkillers just to numb the constant pain. But whether the reason was pain or performance pressure, what he did was still a direct violation of WWE's wellness policy. The company did not just suspend him, they also fined him around $125,000. That is not a small number, even for a top star. WWE's next move was to shift Kurt over to the newly relaunched ECW brand. This was seen as a step down compared to Raw or SmackDown. For someone who had stood on top of the world in both the Olympics and WWE, dropping to a lower-profile show felt like a painful demotion. Instead of accepting that, Kurt Angle chose to walk away from WWE. He spent nearly the next decade working for TNA. During that period, Kurt often talked about his past addictions and steroid use. In a 2009 interview, he basically said that if they wanted to test him now, it would be fine, because he was clean. But he could not deny there was a time when he depended on those things. In another candid moment, Angle stated outright, "I used steroids after I broke my neck. My arm shrank a few inches because blood was not flowing properly anymore." When he looks back on those bad decisions, Kurt Angle admits the price he paid was not just the $125,000 fine, it was his reputation. He had once been the symbol of a clean athlete, an Olympic champion who commanded respect. Then one day he had to face the reality that people were talking about him as a cheater. For Angle himself, that was the harshest blow of all. A scar not on his skin, but right in the pride of a champion who had once sworn he needed nothing but his own ability to stand on top of the podium. Number 2. Edge. When the Signature Pharmacy scandal broke, Adam Copeland, known as Edge, was at the absolute peak of his career. He was on every major WWE show. The interesting thing is, just by looking at him, he never really fit the typical juiced-up look. He was not ridiculously huge. He did not look like a marble statue. He was tall, lean, and toned, built more for speed than sheer mass. Maybe that is why, when his name showed up in the scandal, a lot of fans were genuinely shocked. But if you compare the Edge of that era to the Edge we see today, you can clearly see how his body has changed over time. According to the investigation files, Edge was found to have received human growth hormone like somatropin and genotropin, along with stanozolol, between September 2004 and roughly 2006 to 2007. All of these fall into the category of steroids or performance-enhancing substances banned under WWE's wellness policy. Edge's version of the story was that he didn't start using the substances on his own. In an interview, he said they were prescribed by a doctor as part of his recovery from neck surgery 2 years before the scandal broke, an injury that nearly ended his career. The issue was that he didn't stop after the recovery phase ended. He continued using them even after returning to full-time competition, appearing weekly on TV, working major matches, and being involved in top storylines. That made the claim of purely medical treatment harder to believe. Although Edge denied intentionally cheating, WWE still ruled it a wellness policy violation and suspended him. Ironically, most fans barely noticed, because the suspension overlapped with time he was already missing due to a torn pectoral muscle. To viewers, it just looked like another injury absence. Edge returned, won more titles, and continued telling great stories in the ring. Over time, the steroid incident faded into the background, becoming little more than a footnote. Still, the reality remains. There was a period when Edge used substances that are now banned, and a period after he stopped. The Edge we see today looks more natural, less thick, less tight, with smaller muscles that fit his age and the wear of a long career. That contrast reflects both his time using those drugs and his decision to move on from them. Number 1. Randy Orton. The same applies to Randy Orton. It may surprise some fans, but his steroid history is documented, not rumor, though his strong PR and legendary career helped bury it over time. Orton was first flagged by WWE's wellness program in 2006 for performance-enhancing substances. At the time, the company handled it lightly, avoiding serious punishment to protect one of its top stars. Things escalated during the Signature Pharmacy scandal, which revealed Orton had purchased somatropin, nandrolone, stanozolol, and testosterone between September 2004 and February 2007. Despite this, WWE still avoided cracking down hard, even as most other wrestlers involved were suspended. That changed in 2012, when Orton failed another drug test, this time for methandrostenalone, dianabol, and marijuana. Under WWE's three-strike policy, he was suspended for 60 days. That marked the last time his name appeared in any performance-enhancing drug report. After that, Orton stayed clear of substance scandals, and the gradual changes in his physique suggested that phase had ended. Following an 18-month absence due to a serious back injury, he returned at Survivor Series 2023 looking heavier, thicker, and healthier, more muscular than before, yet far more natural than his earlier years. While many wrestlers peak physically during steroid-heavy periods and decline afterward, Orton has gone the opposite way. Comparing his past physique to his current one shows a clear difference between a body maintained by drugs and one rebuilt over time through discipline and experience. These stories aren't meant to tear down heroes, but to remind us that every spotlight comes with a price.